Hi, welcome to my channel. This is Sammy from Taguchi Furniture. I'm starting on YouTube and I have no idea how to do stuff. Come on, don't talk like that. Say it with your chest, right? Hi, I'm Sammy from... Come on, let me get this. You got this, Sammy. Hi, I'm Sammy. Hi, I'm Sammy. Anyway, this is the project I'm doing right now. I worked on or I finished. What am I? How you say? Anyway, this is a project that I just finished, and I was commissioned to do a keepsake box for a high school graduation present. So I did a continuous grain on the sides with the walnut, so it looks like one long board that wraps around the whole outside. Then I resawed the tops and bottoms, which the top I did a curly maple, so it kind of looks like a mirror image. And the bottom is the walnut, and you definitely can see that. And this is my logo right here. Then for the, when I connected the sides, I did a miter joint. Then I reinforced it with splines. And I was originally gonna go with maple, but I really like color and I like the way color pops, so I went with padauk. And I'm glad I went with it because I really like this color. Then on the inside, I did a custom engraving of the person that this is actually going to, and I did a little chain stop right here. And for the finish, like honestly, I've never got a finish this smooth. It's like glass smooth, and I love it. Anyway, I will show close-ups at the end, and I'll show you how I built this. So yeah, thanks for watching. I need to get a flat reference point, so I find the side that has the least amount of rock, and that's the side I'm actually gonna flatten first. And I like using pencil marks so I can see how much I need to take off. And once that's flat, I end up putting it against the fence, and when I run that side along the jointer, it's gonna make it perpendicular to the front face. And I'm just double checking for square with a combination square. Then I'm running the other side through the planer, which will make it parallel to the first side, because in the end, you want all sides to be flat and square to each other. Then I'm taking the board to the table saw and ripping it to final width. Then I'm using my crust cut sled to cut it to final length. I'm marking a triangle on top, and this will reference the orientation of the board after I resaw it on the bandsaw. You'll see why later. And right here, I'm just marking the center line for the resaw. In order to get a continuous grain look, you have to resaw the board first, and those inside faces are the ones that are actually going to be the show faces in the end, and you'll see why later. So the issue that I always find myself in is that anytime I resaw a piece of wood, there's so much tension that gets relieved that it ends up bowing on me again. And as you can see, all the rock, so I had to clean these boards up again. So when I first started this project, I only found the piece of wood that I wanted for the sides. I had no idea what I wanted for the tops and bottoms yet, so I just continued on with the build. Then later on, I ended up finding these pieces of wood that I thought would be good. So the top is this curly maple, and the bottom is this dark walnut right here. And that's the beauty of it. When someone gives me free reign of a project, I feel like my creativity comes out way better. And just like my other board, I have to mill up the wood to flatten and square up all my sides. This is what I'm doing here. And right here, I'm just resawing the tops and bottoms for the box. And if I haven't said this before, that tension release is quite annoying. So I'm milling those boards back to flat. And here I'm just pointing out that there's some gaps right there. It's because of the saw curves from the bandsaw blade. So I just need to clean this up before I glue them together, because I want these boards to have that book match look. And before I clean up the edges, I tape them back together as if they were a one whole piece. And as you can't see, no gap. But trust me, there are no gaps. And for the people that don't follow me on Instagram, I love me some French's yellow mustard bottles. They're cheap, they're easy to use, and honestly, I like them way better than the bottles that you buy for glue dispensing. And right here, I'm actually using Titebond 2 for this. Right here, I'm taking the two resawn boards for the sides and cutting one long and one short piece from each one. I learned this technique from someone on YouTube, and I'll post a link to their video down in the description. I'm using miter joints to connect the sides of the box, so I'm setting up my table saw blade to 45 degrees using my digital dial indicator. So for these cuts, you have to proceed with caution. The trick for continuous grain boards is trying not to cut into the face that is pointing up. This will preserve that continuous grain look as if the board wraps around the whole box without any interruptions. And it totally felt like I was just reading a book right there, right? And since I'd never done a box before, I wanted to make sure that my miter cuts were spot on, so I decided to do a dry fit. And I used blue painter's tape here to help, how do you say, see if there are no gaps there. And I was pleasantly surprised. I actually didn't see any gaps here. Right here, I'm just unclamping the tops and bottoms. And I knew I couldn't get to all the glue cleanup, so there's some dry glue that I had to scrape off with the painter scrape, aka paint scraper. Then off camera, I'm gonna clean these boards to the drum sander before I cut them to final dimensions. And since these bottoms and tops are book match, I wanted to make sure that I cut the equal amount off each side. That way it preserves that book match in the center. I'm using a flat tooth saw blade here, and I'm using my 1/4 inch gauge block to set the height for this. And you could see me stumbling on my words and not speaking English properly. But I'm setting the height for the grooves I'm going to cut for the inside of the box, and this is where the top and bottom will fit into. You see a piece of MDF scrap right there on the side? I'm actually using that as a test piece to make sure that I get all my cuts right before I actually cut into the main pieces. Then I'm checking the groove width with a gauge block to make sure I like the fit before I actually make the cuts on my actual pieces. I'm using a sacrificial board along my fence because without it, my saw blade would be cutting into my fence, and I need to cut rabbets into the top and bottom boards where these will seat into the grooves that I created on the sides. The goal here is when the box is assembled, those boards are flush with the top and bottom of the box. I hope. And there are many ways to cut rabbets, like you can use a dado stack if you have that, which I do, but as you can tell, I'm lazy when it comes to certain things and I didn't feel like changing into those blades. Or if you have a router table, you can use a router bit too. I don't have a router table in my new space, so I went with the sacrificial board and it worked out really well. And I'm doing one last dry fit to make sure that everything fits before this box becomes whole. I knew it would be a pain to sand the inside of the box after it's assembled, so I went ahead and sanded it to 220 grit before I glued it up. I decided to switch over to my beefier sander just because it takes off more material at a lower grit. The other one I just used for finish sanding. And I'm taping the outsides with blue painter's tape because it does act as a clamp when you put them together. And I'm also taping the inside seams, that way when I cut off the lid, I can pull that off and it'll prevent glue squeeze out or minimize the glue squeeze out. And it'll make the cleanup much easier and less annoying. But nonetheless, it is still annoying. And I'm using clamps for extra clamping pressure because I wasn't sure how the tape would hold. And I don't know what I was thinking, but obviously you'll see what future Sammy has to deal with. Look at that mess. I ended up over clamping and that's why you see those edges overhanging. So I had to deal with that. And luckily I had to soften the edges anyway on the corners, so I'm just taking 180 grit and I'm just taking gentle passes over it. And actually it turned out really well. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell that I messed up there, but still annoying. The boards didn't completely line up after the glue up, but I kind of figured that. So I'm just taking a hand plane and taking small shavings off at an angle, making sure I don't have any blowout. Honestly, I just need a block plane for this, but this is what I had. But these are the tiny shavings that I took off. Hand tooling is actually pretty cool, and I definitely want to get into that when I grow up. What are you talking about when you grow up? And I needed to make a spline jig off camera, and I just YouTubed it, and I ended up finding a pretty simple plan by Michael Alm. And I'll link his build in the description below. And as you saw, I used a scrap piece to gauge where I want my cuts to be. I had these padauk strips lying around from previous cutting board builds. I don't know what I was doing, I was just winging it, so I just took my combination square and started making random triangles. And I was cutting them on the bandsaw. And for tiny pieces and close up to the blade, I like to use a pencil eraser. That way I don't get my fingers too close to the blade. My camera settings were way off right here, but that's not the point. The point is gluing the spines into the spline holes. So what I was trying to say was, I'm gluing in the splines here. But you can already tell that padauk is gonna pop. I'm already liking it right here too. I'm trying to cut off as much as I can without cutting into the box. So I'm just using a handsaw right here, then afterward I'm gonna clean it up with a router bit. Okay. You get the point. Yeah. I'm using a flush trim router bit right here to clean up the rest of the splines. My Instagram woodworking friend said that I like really big bits, but I have no idea what she's talking about. Come on now. This box is coming along pretty nicely now. I'm just cleaning up the splines, but at the same time, I'm gonna sand it to about 220 because I figure with the lid off, it'll be harder to sand evenly, so that's what I'm doing in preparation for the lid cutoff. I know this may seem like a ridiculously awesome power stance, but honestly my back was really hurting and this was the form that I needed to get through the sanding. I don't like sharp edges, so I just take 220 grit sandpaper and lightly go over the edges to soften them up a little bit. Since I already sanded this box to 220, I didn't want to scratch it up on the table saw, so I decided to tape it off, and it actually worked really well. I ended up using shims to hold the lid together when I made cuts, but this is where it got really interesting. I didn't think this one through. I should have cut first on the long side. Then, as you can tell, I kind of had some trouble right here, but it all worked out in the end. But trust me, don't do this move. And with the weight of my arms being naturally beefy, this technique actually didn't work out for me, so I scrapped it. So I switched over to a card scraper to clean up all the saw marks. This actually worked out really well for me. So I'm just doing some fine cleanup right here. I would put the lid on and see if there are spots touching but gaps elsewhere. Then I would just mark those spots because those were the high spots. Then I would just scrape them down until I got even gaps all the way around the sides. I haven't really used lacquer before, but I was very intrigued because I know it has a quick dry time. And I tell you what, I really love this stuff. I'm just spraying my first coat here, and the can said light passes, so I did light passes. And this stuff really stinks, so make sure you're wearing your respirator, you get some good airflow in your shop. Also, don't be lazy like me and cover your surroundings with something, because now I have dry lacquer all over my workbench and it looks pasty white now. After applying 3 coats of lacquer, I end up sanding it smooth with 400 grit sandpaper, and it creates all that white dust, and the trick is to not blow it off with air. You want to wipe it off, because some of that dust will actually fill in some of that grain, and the beauty of lacquer is that it melts to the previous layer. So it'll kind of act as a wood filler. I know this whole process looks weird and it looks like you messed up, or why would you want to do that to something that already looks beautiful? But honestly, there's a lot of dust in the air and some just overspray that creates all these small bumps on it, and it doesn't feel nice. So this will even it out, but it'll actually prepare the box to be really smooth after you apply the last coat. And just like all the other coats, for the last coat, you want to take light passes and make sure you try to get as even as possible, but also you don't really have to worry because it will melt flat and it will be smooth, at least way smoother than you had it before. And a really good tip when it comes to spraying is that you want to get to your hard to reach spots first, then everywhere else afterward. I don't know if I actually did that, but that's the key to getting a good finish. So this is the fun part. To get really good smooth finishes, even though this is already smooth as it is, I take the highest grit sandpaper I have. In this case it was 3000 grit, then I just lightly passed over the whole box, creating this glass smooth finish. And you'll thank yourself later for taking that extra step. I have the latch centered, but I'm visually seeing if I need to make any adjustments before I use my center punch to mark the holes. I'm using blue painter's tape for a depth stop because I don't want to drill holes through the box, especially at this point. I'm using paste wax as lubrication for the screws because since this is going into hardwood, I don't want to take the chance of tiny screws breaking into the wood because I've done that before and it's not fun. As this project comes to an end, I just want to say thank you for watching my first YouTube video. I have some final shots at the end. My camera settings were off, so I ended up taking pictures with my iPhone. And if you want more content, please follow me on Instagram under Taguchi Furniture. Thank you.